So we moved along from the church modes that we saw in the Middle Ages and Renaissance, and we're continuing to use a lot of the techniques and tools that composers developed in the Baroque period even today. As you were able to see in that last video, very similar to the first week or two when we were in our Elements lecture. I showed you the Axis of Awesome 4-chord song. There's just another progression that's very famous, used all the time. Those same 4 chords I showed you in the Axis of Awesome video also developed in the classical Baroque period. The circle of fifths, another development, and the use of chord progressions. Stringing together a specific pattern of chords was developed and exploited around this time. So Johann Sebastian Bach, definitely the powerhouse of the Baroque. He is kind of the sound of the Baroque period. So Johann Sebastian Bach, late German composer, organist and violinist, deeply religious, Lutheran. In fact, he was convinced that his music was God's embodiment, a gift to all mankind, even though he did work in sacred as well as secular positions. Wrote many, many Lutheran chorales, big in counterpoint, big in polyphony. The Fugue was one of his developments. He was really known during his lifetime as a keyboardist, and he wrote in every form except opera. That's going to be on one of your quizzes. Bach never wrote an opera. He also developed what we call equal temperament on a keyboard. Mathematically, the way keyboards were tuned, octaves would be different enough where they couldn't be played together. Bach developed this method of tuning, a tuning system, where all of a sudden music could be transposed easier between instruments. A low C, for example, would be a perfect octave away from even a higher C, where there was originally a little bit of fluctuation where essentially they'd be up to a half step off. So that's equal temperament in his development. He also helped manufacturers develop early models of the piano. He did not invent the piano. He did help give his input on the piano. He didn't like it, but he was a keyboardist. Organs, we listened to Bach's Organ Fugue in G minor. Very virtuosic piece. The concerto featuring many instruments, including the harpsichord, in our first Baroque lesson. He also very big on improvisation. Again, the basso continuo was the foundation of many Baroque orchestras, and the harpsichordist would typically play an improvisational role based on the chord progressions and chord development. Bach would improvise fugues. He would improvise what he would call his inventions for students, were essentially 2-part contrapuntal pieces in the left and right hand. So very virtuosic. His output was tremendous and really kind of a staple of the Baroque period. His sound, his compositions, as well as his developments outside of composition. Like we talked about equal temperament and helping develop the piano.
Bach is a musical giant, and his ideas and his skill, almost primarily, still leave us all in awe.
Johann Sebastian Bach was born in Eisenach, Germany, on March 21st, 1685. Raised in a family of musicians, Bach learned to play the harpsichord, organ, and violin.
Bach came from generations of musicians. The term Bach, at the time that Johann Sebastian Bach lived, was almost synonymous with being a musician.
As a young boy, Bach was given a religious education, which would deeply affect his life.
Bach was profoundly religious, and he saw everything that he did as a composer and musician as basically an act of prayer.
After landing his first job as a court musician in 1703, Bach worked in various positions as an organist, allowing him to compose church cantatas.
Bach created vast numbers of works for keyboard, and probably the best known of those works is the Toccata and Fugue in D minor. And I think one of the reasons why this has risen to such great popularity was, of course, due to its orchestration in Walt Disney's Fantasia.
From 1717 to 1723, Bach composed a number of works, including the widely regarded Brandenburg concertos and the solo keyboard compositions, the Well-Tempered Clavier.
The Brandenburg concertos have to be the most popular works of Bach, judging from the number of recordings of them that there are. And there are numerous occasions in which all 6 are performed on the same concert.
In 1723, Bach was given a new position where he could both teach students and create an astounding collection of church music.
Bach was appointed cantor or director of music for the 4 main churches in Leipzig, Germany. The cantatas that he created for this purpose contain some of his greatest music.
In 1733, Bach composed Mass in B minor, which gained him a position as royal court composer to the King of Poland.
Bach added to the Mass one section at a time, mostly by utilizing older Lutheran cantatas and adapting them for the Mass. And it, of course, lasts as one of Bach's greatest contributions to sacred music.
Bach created a new composition called the Art of Fugue in 1749, but on July 28th of that year, he died after suffering a stroke.
Bach is considered to be the composer who knew how to put notes together better than any other single composer. Bach has a kind of popularity outside of professional musicians, and the fact that there are nearly 40 Bach festivals in this country, I think, is testimony to that.
So, not the first Bach piece we listened to, as we listened to quite a few last week, but the first piece we're going to listen to this week by Bach, Prelude and Fugue in C minor from the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 1 by Bach. So the Well-Tempered Clavier, I discussed briefly equal temperament tuning. The Well-Tempered Clavier was essentially an experiment and proof that his equal temperament tuning would stand the test. This was essentially the test, playing large ranges over the keyboard. So again, this is going to be a very ornamental passage. This was originally improvised, and I want you to notice the C major chord at the very end. I pointed this out in Bach's Organ Fugue in G minor as well, how the organ concludes the piece with an unexpected major chord instead of what we would typically expect from a minor composition, concluding in the tonic minor. So this is, again, another tool Bach would use, kind of a signature of his experimentation, and it stands the test of time. Again, something that composers still to this day use in all genres from classical to pop. So those were two movements from those studies, the well-tempered Clavier. Prelude, obviously, we discussed the meaning of prelude, where that was derived from, a beginning piece. And fugue, we talked about last week, a style that was originated by Bach, where you would take a main theme, present that theme in full, and then it would enter again in full on another voice. As this second voice is entering, the composer would use a number of different tools to vary the theme, including elongate the rhythms, shorten the rhythms, flip it upside down, which we called inversions, backwards or retrograde, or even retrograde inversion. We'd fragment it, modulate it into different keys, and we get this polyphonic contrapuntal composition called a fugue. So again, very indicative to the Baroque style. Again, these were originally improvised by Bach. Just from that, you can get an idea what kind of musician, what skill level he was really at. So speaking of that, I think I'm going to assign a short response, maybe a paragraph or so. We've talked about timbre and style traits within the music, and I don't have the answer for you here. There's a kind of a fun video of this same composition being played on an electric guitar, and I want you guys to kind of think and discuss in a forum or on Blackboard how important timbre is to the style. Is it, if you change the instruments of, say, a Baroque orchestra, is it still Baroque, or is it that music? And I'll play you this short. I'm going to stop it early, but I'll play you this as an example.